Hello and welcome to Mr. Valentin's podcast for Of Mice and Men. This is a review for my 9th graders. We're going to go over the format of the test and what to expect, go over the plot diagram, and review some basic concepts of Mice and Men. So, let's begin. Of Mice and Men's story is so basic, it's a little hard to make a challenging test, so this should be pretty straightforward for most of us. The first part of our exam is simply going to be a matching column. On this matching column, you will receive a quote, and you will have to identify who said the following quote. This will probably be the most challenging part of the exam, so let's do a couple of examples together. So I generated a sentence, and the sentence is, I don't need no nice food with ketchup. So we have to think, who wanted ketchup, and why doesn't this person want it? And of course, we know that Lenny was a character who wanted ketchup, but decided to not have it, so that way George could have as much ketchup as he wanted. Let's generate another sentence. Okay, the sentence is, you can just as well go to hell. Now shut up. So we have to think, what character would tell another character to shut up? What character would be so direct to tell them to go to hell? And of course we know this very angry character would probably be George. Good. Let's generate another sentence. You stop it now. You'll mess it all up. So this character clearly is slightly angry. You stop it now. And clearly has something on them that is being messed up. So what character would have this problem? And of course, we know the answer is Curly's wife. Let's try a couple more. I wish I shot him myself. Now, we only have two characters who were shot in our story. And we know that was Lenny, and we know that was Candy. So clearly, I shot him by myself, is Candy talking about Candy's dog who gets shot. Good. Let's try two more. Suppose you didn't have nobody. Now, this quote, you might say, this is a difficult quote, I wouldn't know who said this. Well, in your study guide, at the beginning of each chapter, I started with a quote, and this was one of the quotes. And hopefully, you identified who said that. And so we know this was Crooks who said that. So you want to go through your study guide and look at any of the quotes that I gave you, because in there you will probably find many of the quotes from this matching column. Let's try one last one. I like machines. So we have to think of what characters actually talk about machines, and where a machine's mentioned. And in our story, we know that Curly's hand got broke, and the excuse was he got his hand caught in the machine. So this quote comes from something about that. Now, when Lenny is with Crooks, and in comes Curly's wife, Lenny reveals in his own way that he was the one who broke his hand. But he says, I got it caught in the machines. And so Curly's wife then says, I like machines. So this is another quote by Curly's wife. So what you want to do is go through your study guide, look at those quotes, identify who said those quotes, and that'll give you some direction on what to study for the matching column and the quotes. You will have seen all of these quotes in some form from your study guide. The next part of your test is a multiple choice questions On these multiple choice questions, they'll be asking generic information about the story. So if you've read your story and you completed your study guide, this should prove fairly easy, but you want to review those things. So this is 20 multiple choice questions. So I'm going to generate a couple of the answers, questions. Some will be directly on the test, some will not be, so that way you have an idea of what types of questions you'll see. And you'll see how a lot of these questions come directly from the study guide. So a question might be, who had the smelly dog? Either from reading the text in class or completing the study guide, this should be pretty clear. And of course, we know the answer is Candy. I'm going to generate some other questions, but I'm not going to give you the multiple choice options because a lot of these questions I think you should be able to identify. Now, on the test you will have multiple choice, but just for example's sake, we're going to do this dry. So, here's another question. Whose aunt is Aunt Clara? Whose aunt is Aunt Clara? And throughout the story, we know that Aunt Clara is Lenny's aunt. I may ask you to define a certain word, so you might see something along the lines of define the word hyperbole. Now this was in your study guide, so if you defined the word hyperbole, you know that a hyperbole is an exaggeration. But if you didn't do that in your study guide, then this would prove to be very challenging. You want to make sure you look at the beginning part of your study guide. In the beginning part of your study guide, I give you some information about John Steinbeck, the author of our story. You want to make sure you know some of that information. All right. What era does our story takes place? Now we know it's during the Great Depression. We want to know about the location of the story and where John Steinbeck was born. So we know that John Steinbeck was born in Salinas, California. And again, all of this is in your study guide, so you want to make sure you take a look at some of this information. That's really the extent of this section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you one more example, and then we'll move on to the next section. So let's do what color does Curly's wife wear? And we know in our story, Curly's wife is always seen in red. So there's some examples. The next part of our story has to do with the plot diagram. So the first thing we want to do is be able to label said plot diagram. And this might be something I ask for you on the test. So what's the beginning part of our story called? We know the beginning part of our story is called the Exposition. And this dotted line right here is known as the Inciting Incident. We have this line going up, And this line, although known as the rising action, I'm giving you some fancier vocabulary. We are labeling it as the complication. And at the very top, we have our climax. And on the line going down, we have what's known as the falling action, but again, fancier vocabulary, the denouement. And finally, at the very end here, we have our resolution. If you do not use the terminology of the class, I will not mark you correctly. So if you say introduction instead of exposition, it's wrong. If you say narrative hook instead of inciting incident, it's wrong. If you say rising action, falling action, conclusion, those are all wrong. You need to use the terminology of the class. So know it. And be able to spell those words. Most of these will not prove a problem, but denouement or denouement is spelled D-E-N-O-U-E-M-E-N-T. And that can prove some difficulty. So on your test, you'll be asked a certain section from the story, and you have to tell me, did that happen in the exposition, in the inciting incident, in the complication, in the climax, in the denouement, or in the resolution? So let's do some very basic ones. Let's take, for example, Lenny is killed. We know in our story Lenny was killed in the resolution of the story. Let's try another one. We meet George and Lenny. Now again, this is very obvious. We know we met George and Lenny in the exposition. What was the inciting incident of our story? And the inciting incident was the arrival at the new job. How about when did Lenny kill Curly's wife? And we know that occurred in the denouement. The climax was the scene with Lenny talking to Crooks. So anything involving that, we know, is the climax. Let's try a couple more. When did we find out the setting of our story? That our story took place in California. And of course, that's the exposition. How about we meet Curly? We didn't meet Curly in the exposition. They had to arrive at the new job first. So we know they met Curly, and we met Curly in the complication. So there's your plot diagram. Now we filled this out in class, so you should have a full, far more complete one. So you want to review your notes, take again a look at your study guide, and that should direct you in the right frame. The final bit of your test is a review of the parts of speech that we've gone over. We've gone over nouns, verbs, action verbs, linking verbs, pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs. And on your test, you're going to be given sentences. And in these sentences, you will need to identify, I may say, which of the following words is an adjective. And I'll give you a sentence, and you'll have to tell me which word was an adjective. So let's do an example. So in our sentence, I have the sentence, a magnetic field surrounds the earth. I may say, show me which word is an adjective. Remember, an adjective modifies a noun or a pronoun by describing, identifying, or quantifying words. And it usually precedes the noun. So we have a couple nouns in this sentence. So immediately we can knock out some of the words. We know earth is a noun. So we know the answer is not a noun. So if I'm asking for an adjective, it's not the earth. And we know it's not a field. So we can X out those. So that leaves us with magnetic and surrounds. Now remember, it usually precedes the noun, which means it comes before the noun. And so, what is the field? The field is magnetic. So we know magnetic is the adjective. Let me generate another sentence. The teacher allowed students to talk quietly. So in this sentence, I'm going to ask you which word is the adverb. So taking a look at our sentence, teacher allowed students to talk quietly. Again, start with your nouns, a person, place, or thing. So immediately, we could knock out teacher, we can knock out students. So what words do we have left? Allowed, talk, and quietly. A very simple trick to remembering what's an adverb. An adverb will almost always end in ly. So we know the adverb in this sentence is quietly. Let's try two more. The second team won the playoff game in the third quarter. So in this sentence, I'm going to ask again, where is the adjective? And so you have a selection. Team, won, game, third, and quarter. So what type of word is team? We know team is a noun. We know won is an action, so it's a verb. That leaves us with game, third, and quarter. One of these words is the adjective. The other two are nouns. So we can knock out game and quarter. Remember, an adjective can quantify a word. So we have quantity. What is the other adjective in this sentence? Or what is another adjective that quantifies? And of course, the answer is second. One last example. Okay, so I generated the sentence, we will watch the TV program tomorrow. Now looking at this sentence, I want to know where's the pronoun, the verb, the adverb, and the noun. Again, it's always easy to identify where the noun is. The noun is an object. Now you have two objects in this sentence, but one is a noun and one is a pronoun. So a person, place, or thing, a TV program is a thing. And we is substituting whoever the people are. So we know that is the pronoun. That leaves will, watch, and tomorrow. The verb is the action of the sentence. So we know watch, which leaves the adverb. Now, you have to remember the adverb modifies the verb or possibly another adverb. So, in this sentence, we have the word tomorrow, and tomorrow modifies when we are watching. So, we know the adverb is tomorrow. So those are the types of questions you'll see. Alright, so you'll have 10 multiple choice questions that look exactly, and you may see some of these examples exactly from the test right on here. So be sure to review in the last part of your Of Mice and Men packet your pronouns, verbs, noun, adverbs, and adjectives. And that brings us to the end of our review for Of Mice and Men. So if there are any questions, please bring them to my attention. Hope you found this guide useful, and there is extra help available, so if you have any questions, feel free to stop by for extra help for any questions or any assistance with any of this information.